everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today we're going to be discussing Dr. No. Now, Dr. No is a pseudonym that was given to an unidentified serial killer, but he also went by the Ohio prostitute killer or the I-71 killer. Now, this is not to get confused with Herbert Baumeister, the I-70 strangler. I'll put him on a card as well if you are new here. I covered him in my 25 Days of True Crime last year. And if you're a returning subscriber, you've already watched that video. It's quite a long one, but you can enjoy. Now, this serial killer in particular, obviously, like I mentioned, is an unidentified serial killer whose span of crimes lasted from 1981 to 1990. And this spanned over multiple states like Ohio, Illinois, New York, and Pennsylvania. Now, the MO for this serial killer in particular is that basically all of his victims were either likely prostitutes or they were transients, which are easy targets. And the reason I say this is because they're most likely people that won't be someone that would be memorable to a passerby. It's somebody that you can literally see them and then forget their face within an instant. So the killing started on April 24th of 1981 when the discovery of a younger woman was found in Miami County, Ohio. Now, this victim was determined to have died from strangulation after receiving a head injury. Now, at the time of her discovery, there was absolutely no personal belongings on her. They were, however, able to determine that she was very well groomed and there was no sign of sexual activity on her body. Now, this Jane Doe was nicknamed the Buckskin Girl due to her tasseled buckskin poncho that she was wearing. And this Jane Doe would receive her identity back in 2018 when she was publicly identified as Marcia King. Now, our next victim for Dr. No wouldn't be until June 16th, 1985, where she wouldn't be found. Now, this is when a truck driver found 25-year-old Marcia Matthews beaten and barely hanging on to life. This trucker found her about 1 mile away from the Union 76 truck stop. Unfortunately, Marcia would die 2 days after being found due to her traumatic brain injury she suffered after being struck in the head with a heavy and blunt object. Our next victim would be discovered on the 20th of July of 1986. This is 23-year-old Shirley Dean Taylor. She was found beaten and strangled to death. Before she disappeared, she was last seen at the Union 76 truck stop, the same one that Marcia Matthews was found near just a year prior. And Shirley was seen with a regular client of hers, according to some of the witness statements that were taken by the investigators. Now, this client was nicknamed Dr. No, hence where we get the name Dr. No from. And his identity has never been established. Shirley would just be found a few miles from the last place she was seen, but she didn't have any shoes or underwear. Just 5 months later, in December of 1986, 18-year-old April Bennett would go missing from that same truck stop, Union 76, and her body would be found just a few days after she went missing. But this time her body would be found about 70 miles away from Austin town. Just like our previous victims, she was beaten, she was strangled, and some of her clothes were missing as well. Now, just a few days after the discovery of April Bennett, 26-year-old Jill Allen was found murdered in Illinois near Interstate 70. She, just like Shirley and April, were prostitutes. Even though she was found in a different state, the modus operandi is still the same for her killing, just like the others. Jill was beaten and strangled to death. Her bra, her shoes, and her underwear have never been found. 27-year-old Anne Marie Patterson went missing from Union 76 truck stop as well on February 7th of 1987. She would turn up about 40 days later when her body was discovered, but she was found 250 miles away near Cincinnati. About a week before her disappearance, she was arrested by police, and while she was at the station, she gave the police information about a murder suspect, and she even went as far as describing his vehicle. Now, while investigating, law enforcement came to realize that Patterson had made an appointment through a CB radio with a client that was nicknamed Dr. No. It was the man that she characterized as being extremely negative, and after this meeting with him is when she disappeared. It was the information that she gave. He was then dubbed as Dr. No. Another body of a woman was found on August 10th of 1987, but this time she was found in Englewood. Her underwear and jeans were around her ankles, but her clothes from her torso up were missing. There was also tire tracks at the scene, and it was determined that her corpse was thrown out of the killer's car. During her autopsy, it was determined that she died via strangulation and that she was between the ages of 20 to 25. Also, even though she had quite a large amount of tattoos and jewelry on her body, she laid unidentified until 2010 when she was identified as 21-year-old Paula Beverly Davis. Now, what's interesting about her is that she was actually included on a task force that was related to the murders. Now, and this task force was formed in 1991. There is some theories about her death and how it could have been a retaliation from a drug dealer that she was last seen with, or the woman that she was last seen with, apparently, or that her death is from that of a completely unrelated serial killer. On November 22nd, 1987, the body of LaMonica Cole was discovered in Breezewood, Pennsylvania. She was 19 years old at the time. And even though this truck stop was in a completely different state, she still remains a potential victim on this list due to her dying via strangulation. She was also from Ohio. Some of her things were recovered, but not everything. Her pimp, Derek Mims, he told police that he last saw her traveling in a blue semi-trailer truck with white stripes, and he believed that this was her killer. The following year, on March 29th of 1988, the body of 31-year-old Terry Rourke was found on one of the bridges that passes through the Mohawk River. It was determined that she died because of a traumatic brain injury that happened several hours prior to her body being discovered. Now, this injury was a result of her being beaten with a blunt object. Some of her clothes were never found, including her underwear and shoes, which helped police add Terry Rourke to the list of Dr. No victims. On April 19th of 1990, this is when Jane Doe number 2 would be found near a truck stop on the I-70. Her clothes were missing, but her underwear remained, so this is kind of a different one. We only have 2 that have their underwear remaining on their body. Now, her autopsy would uncover that she died because of a traumatic brain injury that was a result of being beaten, and it was also determined that she died. She died and she also had sex within a 12 to 24 hour span before being found. Now, with these details, they were able to once again come to the conclusion that she also was a victim of Dr. No. She would remain unidentified for 27 years until she got her name back. This Jane Doe number 2 was 27-year-old Patrice Anita Corley. Now, while police were looking into this case, each eyewitness would say that this killer was large, tall, with fair skin, dark hair, and somewhere between 25 to 40. They also would give characteristics that he wore glasses and he talked with an accent as if he was from the northeastern states, possibly from New England. The vehicle that he was seen driving was described as a 1984 silver truck with wind blockers and a red hood. Very distinct vehicle if you think about it. Now, the Ohio State Police and volunteers would post over 4,000 photos of the victims and a possible identity kit of the offender at 130 different truck stops and service stations across Ohio. But they also did the same at another 1,350 truck stops in 9 other states. And they were also offering a $10,000 reward for any information about Dr. No. Now, 5 people would ultimately be detained who had been nicknamed Dr. No at different times, but there was never any charges filed, and those names have never been publicly disclosed. To this day, they have not been able to establish this killer's identity due to him never really leaving any trace evidence on the victim or at a crime scene. There was some things left, which we'll kind of talk about because there was a break in the case. But April of 1991, 36-year-old Alvin Wilson became a subject of interest for this case. He was a trucker, he owned 2 tractors, and apparently his hair matched those on some of the victim. There was other evidence that had a slight indication that he possibly could have committed the Ohio murders, but it also became public knowledge that he was arrested on assault and attempted murder charges in 1989. He was also tested against some evidence that was found on these women, but his tests were inconclusive. Also in 1991, John Fontenberry He was arrested on several murder charges across 4 states. He too was thought to be a suspect, but he was ruled out because his MO and profile victims were completely different. In 1994, James Robert Cruz Jr. was convicted of the murder of Dawn Marie Birnbaum, of which was found along the I-80. Now, because her clothes were missing, they thought that he would be a reasonable suspect for the I-71 killings. He too would be tested, but he was ruled out for these murders as well. In 1995, Sean Patrick Grobel admitted he killed 2 prostitutes in early 1995 in Tennessee. He would become a suspect in the case, but due to his age and the fact that Dr. No's first murder took place in 1981, he was ruled out. And the reason for this is because he was also serving in the Army at the time of the 1980s murders, and he was not in Ohio. In November of 2005, Delmas Colvin was arrested after DNA profiling. He had killed 5 prostitutes in Toledo, Ohio, and after he was arrested, he confessed to killing at least 2 more in New Jersey. But when he asked if he was Dr. No, he was adamant that he had no involvement in those murders. So clearly he knew about these murders, but he was adamant that he had no involvement. That wasn't him. So it seems to me that just like I talked about in the Redhead murders case, truck drivers often frequent the same truck stops, as we can tell with Dr. No, and a lot of them know each other. They know each other via the CB radio, they talk a lot on the radio, but there's a lot of things you pick up from other truck drivers that you don't really think about until you start, you're getting questions, which clearly that's a thing with him because he refused to talk about it. Which is a known fact. He didn't want to talk about it, and he denied that he had any involvement in these murders. So clearly, he was scared just as much as the other people were that frequented the same truck stop that Dr. No did. So with that being said, in early 2019, the biggest break in this case happened. Samuel Legg was arrested in Arizona. With the use of DNA profiling, again, like what happened with Delmas Colvin, they were able to prove that Samuel Legg was the culprit for at least 4 of the Ohio-Illinois murders. So when he first committed one of these murders, he would have been the age of 20, and this was in 1989. With this coming out, it also came out that he was initially arrested for the rape of a minor that happened back in 1997, and it also became public knowledge that he was also the suspect in the death of his 14-year-old stepdaughter, Angela Hicks, but there was never enough evidence to tie him to that murder or to charge him. Now, Dr. No still remains a mystery and one of the most prevalent unidentified serial killers in the United States, and the remaining victims that weren't tied to Samuel Legg, their cases are still unsolved. This case is so wild because there's so many victims, there's so many possible victims that could be tied to this case, but they have a hard time figuring out who exactly is the one that murdered them. What are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments down below. I would love to know, and I will see you guys in my next video.